Welcome everyone to Chapter 2, Behaviorism. So to get things kicked off, who can tell me what fight or flight is? Yeah, over there, Hallie.
It's an instinctual response to a scary situation where you either want to attack what's happening or get away from it.
Exactly, great. Everyone give snaps to Hallie. Woo-hoo! There we go. So exactly, so depending on what the response is and the stimuli, you're gonna have an adverse reaction to it. So, such as loud noises, angry faces, or threatening gestures, our immediate response is sweat and like, what am I gonna do next? What are my next steps? And that is very common within the fight or flight response and is very highly correlated to behavior as well. And so with that, it is the most common way to kind of figure out in a moment that's very heated and potentially dangerous what you're going to do. So who can tell me what a neutral experience is? Connor.
Something that doesn't trigger your fight or flight, just, experience, it's not threatening.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. So it's just a natural stimuli, something that is a bell ringing or the wind blowing on your face. But depending on how that is associated with our individual lives, it could become a fight or flight response. So for instance, veterans, when they hear fireworks, have that fight or flight response, which to us, it's very neutral or something that we are accustomed to. So that's something to think about. So who can tell me, for behavioral modification, what is the definition of that, or how could you say the method for teaching new blank? What would you fill that blank in with? Behavioral modification. Method for teaching new...
Behaviors?
Yes! Genius! Great job. Exactly. Methods for teaching new behaviors. So this plays right into behaviorism for how can we track and see, but also when it's done and said, what does that mean and how do you reflect on that? So for reinforcers, who's heard of positive and negative reinforcement in all aspects, right? Okay. So depending on if it's positive, you get a carrot versus the stick method. So some type of treat or good grade, whatever it may be. And then the negative is somewhat considered or assimilated with a punishment or something that is going to cause detriment to your psyche or yourself moving forward. So who can tell me what a quick punishment for being grounded?
Getting your phone taken away.
Thank you, Cameron. Yes, exactly. Getting your phone taken away is one of the biggest ones that we see now. So also for continuous reinforcement, if we are consistently taking your phone away, how likely are you going to care each time your phone is taken away?
Less and less, probably.
Yeah, exactly, right? You're like, okay, my phone's getting taken away again. That's fine with me. It's been taken away the last 2 weeks. So depending on the reinforcement, if it's too much positive or too much negative, you become desensitized to it. So if you're consistently being grounded to your room or having your phone taken away, the odds of you carrying it a month, if it consistently happens, is very unlikely. You're like, okay, cool. I'll find something else to wreak havoc on, whatever it may be. So be careful when you are conditioning other individuals or scaffolding, helping, guiding, whatever it may be, that you're not being too extra or over the top with either of them. So for the social learning theory, it's all based on observation, and this is basically us looking at things around us and saying, okay, what am I gaining from this? What patterns am I seeing? And how can I assimilate this or accustom it to my brain and make that my new experience? So the number one on this social learning theory is imitation. And that's often how we catch on quickly, is doing things hands-on or kind of imitating one another. So there is a big example that's commonly used for this theory for imitation or mocking. Who can tell me what that is, or who it is? It's okay, it was a trick question. It's a baby! Babies love imitating us. And that's how they learn, is through social learning theory. Is when we go goo goo gaga, they say ooh goo goo gaga. And that's the first latch. And so mocking us is a way to learn, and somewhat easier as well. Has anyone heard of Bandura in here? Yeah, you have? What have you heard about him?
Is it with the clown doll? Am I
Yes.
getting confused?
Yeah, exactly.
They would have an adult and a kid, and the adult would punch the clown, and then they'd leave the room and see what the kid would react to, or
Yeah.
how he would interact with it.
Yeah, so playing on that theory as well is introducing these kids for a focus group to, here's a video of other kids playing with dolls, and they're beating those dolls up. Now here's a group of kids that gets to play with dolls, right? in that group that was shown a video of kids beating up their doll, they had higher rates of beating up their doll when they were left in a room with their doll, which is exactly what we've been talking about, imitation or social learning theory. And so based on that and the practices, we've been able to gain information on how that impacts kids. And these video games we're hearing about now, does that impact the psyche? Does that increase gun use? Those are a couple of arguments that Bandura could be dabbling in there. The last thing that we'll end on is intrinsically motivated and what that means. Who has an idea for what that means?
Is intrinsic inside yourself?
Yeah.
So it's self-rewarding?
Yeah, exactly. That's a great, actually. Self-rewarding motivation. What am I going to do to get to where I want to be? So an end goal or a vision that motivates you individually. So what pushes you all to do your work that you do day to day? What makes you get out of bed smiling and ready to conquer?
For me, it's college and class. I want to pass and I want to get my degree, so I have to get out of bed and get to class.
Okay, what happens if you don't go to class?
I feel awful about myself.
Okay, bingo, bamo. So that's your intrinsic self saying, if you don't go, you're going to feel awful. Do this, you'll feel way better, right? And I wish we all had that sense of intrinsic motivation for class. But moving forward, it's some sort of desire or buy-in that you already have some type of investment with. So for you, it might be that you pay for your higher education institution's tuition, and that's enough motivation for you to get out of bed so you don't waste your dime, right? Exactly, so those are great examples. Does anyone else have another one? Yeah.
And going to work so you get paid. So you
Boom.
Can pay bills.
Exactly, right? And that can somewhat be an external motivation as well, because it's money being given to you, it's tangible, but it's the same exact thing. What gets you out of bed, right? I love that. Okay, beautiful. Well, thank you, and then tune in next week for our next presentation. Thank you. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to this week's Chapter 3, the Cognitive Architecture. So jumping right into it, sensory registration. Who can tell me the 5 senses off the top of their head? Over here. Let's hear it, Brad.
Sight, hearing, seeing, touching, and smelling.
Bingo, bammo, slammo, exactly. So what the sensory register is basically all of those 5 senses after they've been processed through cognitively, right? They have this one-stop shop where it says, okay, with this information, how are we going to process it? How are we going to move forward? So basically, simplistically, sensory register is that. So moving forward in kind of how we are able to imagine this or recall this information after we have our 5 senses process it is the dual coding theory. I have listed up here language and mental imagery as this theory's like proper principles, and moving into a zebra. And I think I talked to a couple of you about the zebra theory and what it means for language and mental imagery and how that translates for dual coding theory. But basically, language is the dichotomous relationship with this, saying, okay, for all of the words I'm able to see, process, and kind of have more of that visual attainment for a structure, if you could imagine that. But some individuals process information, maybe not exclusively, but additionally with mental imagery. And so I want all of you to close your eyes real fast. And then I'm going to say a word. I want you to count the amount of stripes on that animal. Zebra. Raise your hand if you can count them all. Anyone? How many of you can see a zebra? Okay, so that is exactly this coding for you, is language and mental imagery. That mental imagery has the attachment of, okay, I can see the zebra, but what exactly, how many stripes is it? What does the hooves look like? Like the ears, are they cut? Who knows? They have scratches, right? All of that fun stuff. So after processing all the information, it's kind of like, how do we retain it? And how do we move forward with that? And in the picture, the book I passed out to all of you has a picture for you to look at. It's called the Information Processing Model. So it starts with sensation, perception, attention, learning, and remembering/knowing. So this briefly breaks down how you know what you know up to this point in time. So sensation, as Brad mentioned earlier, are the 5 senses. So it's a brief documentation of the environment, what you see, smell, touch, hear, all of that fun stuff. And then moving forward into perception, this is kind of your internal lens on the world, is all-encompassing of your implicit biases, imposing order as it makes sense to you in all regards. So we all have our opinions based on our perceptions and growing up and upbringing. So what does that mean as you enter into the world, right? Attention, if, for instance, you're looking at this presentation, all of this is going into your working memory right now. Okay, so attention means working memory. You processing that, it's either going to stay in your short term or then transfer into long term, but then we'll move into the learning for what that means. So when you're learning this information, it's temporary to permanent. So you may hear all this information today, but it might take some repetition for you to retain it or whatnot. So learning is actually having that temporary switch over to, oh, I can recall now. I can bring this back into my working memory instead of storing it there and then losing it. And the last one is remembering or knowing. And this is bringing all that long term to working and holding that knowledge in one place. So when you're able to pull it out of your long-term memory, it's saying, okay, for instance, we'll move into the next slide actually to kind of solidify this example for you. So automaticity, who has an idea for what that means? It's a big word and I had to look it up. Okay, sweet. So in short, simply, it is just your muscle memory, basically. So what are you able to recall? So riding a bike, for instance, that's most commonly used, that is just automatic. Once you've done it, it's kind of in your long-term memory, and you're able to pull it back out into working memory so you can ride a bike whenever you want. You don't have to relearn every time. As for chunking, the other method is basically a pattern of meaningful information that you can call on to make life easier. I put the example up here as an area code because it's inferred in Utah that it's either 435, 801, and then any number after that, we don't know. You guess, basically. But with those three numbers already given to you, wherever you live, you have sort of an idea, okay, I can chunk this. This is an 801 area. That's inferred. So when someone gives you their 10-digit phone number, you typically only remember 7 letters or numbers out of that set instead of the 801 or 435 or what it may be, because you have that assumption and you've chunked that information. Are there any questions on this week's lesson? Beautiful. Okay, I hope you all have a great day. Greetings, y'all. Welcome back for another fun week. Chapter 4, Theories of Knowledge today. So, ontology and epistemology. Who's heard those terms before? Okay, some of you. I love that. So breaking it down really fast, ontology is what is real. So it's reality versus being and how you can make that distinction. So an example of that would be God, right? Never seen, but believed. And how can you tread that line while being right? And really there's not a right answer to that. Beyond that though, epistemology is how do we know what we know? So it kind of questions, is your perception shaping everything that you have up to this moment? Or is that reality for you truly reality? And it's very theoretical. It takes a lot of thought, but as long as you've heard some of the concepts and ideas around them, that would be a good stepping stone into this lesson. So moving into logical positivism. This is basically, I gave myself a good job because I've been practicing that word for a while. Anyhoodle. So this is the information that is very basic, it's foundational, it's almost a necessity. And a very simple, brief example of that would be sun bright. So who can share another sentence where that might be used in a more constructive way? So the sentence sun bright.
The sun is bright.
Exactly, right? The sun is bright. So getting more of that beef or fluff to it with a proper sentence structure or syntax. So logical positivism, Lordy. Positivism, thank you, is sun bright. Very basic, and that's all you really have in your repertoire. So some people question though, is this substantial enough? Is the bare bones something that can really translate meaning or significance to others? And this brought us into more evolved semiotics. So these basically are, words have meanings obviously, and we can kind of describe things very shortly, but for language, sound, image, and objects, those are all just as enough of information as words are, right? And so we have Saussure, who broke down the signifier and signified as a dichotomous kind of relationship for a word that means something. For instance, a dog is a small furry creature that we love, those kind of relationships. And so this led to a very important discovery of why we have words and what those meanings mean. far beyond what we have interpreted now. But this was called the question by peers, almost as, okay, those two might be true, but let's take it a step further with the interpretant. And I brought my book out just in case to explain this very thoroughly, that this process that led to the understanding of language. So the sun is bright, but it's also round and yellow, and there's other elements to it that are being excluded when you don't have that mental image attached to it. So Pierce breaks it down as representamen, object, and interpretant. So I'll pass this around for all of you to look at. The little triangle down there. And this is basically breaking down the logic that you are an interpretant in this puzzle piece of language. I would almost dare say we are the ones that were able to come up and form the language as a society, and now it's up to us to interpret it as it bends and becomes more flexible with all of these mental images and everything else along those lines. Are there questions on any of that? Okay. Then that will be the lesson for this week. Thank you all for coming. Welcome, everyone. We are going to begin chapter 5, complex cognition. So this, breaking down or starting off with problem solving. So basically, a quick synopsis of problem solving is the lack of direction that causes kind of a little bit of chaos is something that is able to stimulate the brain. So problem solving is your brain trying to solve a puzzle, basically. And this is very hard for people to grasp and conceptualize because when they don't achieve something, they get frustrated almost as if they didn't problem solve correctly. But a lot of that time comes with trial and error. So as you're problem solving, there's not one person that's going to have all of the answers all the time. You have to allow yourself to fall and get back up and recuperate, also known as resiliency. So moving forward, success is not promised, and know what that means and achieve for greatness, but know you're not always going to get it, and when you don't, come back with a stronger problem solving technique. So some examples of problem solving, very simply, are what should I wear today? What to eat with such little groceries in my fridge? And then do any of you have a complex problem solving story you'd like to share? No one? That's okay. We'll move forward from there. So with this whole concept of problem solving comes with heuristics. And this is basically a familiarization that leads to better outcomes. So it's kind of like an association in your brain that you tie together. Sorry, I butchered the word. So basically an idea of this, or an example, would be on the stovetop that does not have a picture depicting which burner the knob goes to. So typically when we look down and we're like, okay, or wherever you turn your oven and stove off on, you are able to look and say, this is the front right one. So you will turn it to go to the front right and it'll turn it on. And that is heuristics. That's giving you an example of leading you or scaffolding you into the right direction. So some type of familiarization. Yeah. So an idea of this as well is a domain-specific heuristics, which is basically like a skill or something that you excel in. An example of this would be math problems for some individuals. And then who can think of another one as a skill? Yeah.
Human resources managers, they know how to deal with
Yeah.
interpersonal conflict.
Exactly. That's a good one. So moving forward with critical thinking, and encompassed in this is the complexity, right, of how the cognitive brain is able to process items. So for critical thinking, the number one item we all look at is quality assessment. What's going to be the best outcome in this situation? Maybe not for me, maybe not for my friend, but overall. President Brad Mortensen, you're going to be in my homework assignment. President Brad Mortensen! You'll see that later. Moving forward for critical thinking, not the what to do, but the what is true. So this is kind of when you challenge yourself from the problem-solving stages of how do I do this, how do I do this, and when you get to that end goal, your final achievement, you're able to say, now how is this true and what makes it true? It's almost a solidification of your theory in the first place. This can become tricky, however, critically thinking, speaking, when it comes to cognitive dissonance. Who knows what that is? Cognitive dissonance? Who's heard of dissonance in a music class? Yes. Can you explain what that means?
It's like when two notes don't quite go together and it sounds a little bit funky.
Okay, so with that in mind, what would you think cognitive dissonance would be?
I don't know, something that sounds like it's something, but it is something else.
Exactly. So some information you're getting that does not cooperate with what you know to be true. So if someone says the sky is blue and you've been raised your whole life to think it's red, you're going to say, no, that's not true. It's red. And your brain will fight off the urge. And a lot of times we get defensive when those situations happen. So let's say it was flipped. I know the sky's blue, but someone says it's red. We know we're right? So we'll say, no, it's blue. And so while navigating critical thinking, it's very important to know how you interact with individuals too, and how you know you're challenging yourself, because you may not be right all the time, and have the capability to say, oh, this is not what I agree with, but are you on the right track to something I didn't know? So always challenge yourself day by day. But moving forward to Bloom's taxonomy. Who's heard of Bloom's taxonomy? Okay. Do you have an idea of what it might be back there? Okay. Well, then we'll just move forward. So basically, Bloom's taxonomy starts with knowledge, moves up to comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and then evaluation. So basically starting with that foundation of knowledge, right? So with knowledge, that's you getting the information. But going forward a step is comprehending. How are you understanding it and fitting it into your brain? Moving forward is application. How do you apply it in your day-to-day life? Or when you know something, how can you make your life easier in the future? And a lot of those cycle around Twitter, for instance, a life hack or certain things to do things that aren't typically marketed, right? And then beyond that is analysis, is okay, this is working and it's a shortcut. How can I do it better? Or what it's working really well, so that way you can kind of compound it and condense it into more viable information in your brain. Moving forward to synthesis. How can you break it down in all the moving parts in that situation once you figure that out? And the last one is how can you evaluate yourself? Yeah, it worked out, or no, it didn't, and here's why. So always using those critical steps as you navigate the sphere is the best approach to the complexity that is cognition or the human brain. Any questions? Beautiful. Greetings, class. Welcome to Chapter 6, Emotion, Motivation, and Volition. So, starting off with the Trilogy of Mind. Who can read off the 3 main bulleted points on the presentation today? Over there, Diana.
Cognition, affect, and
Conation.
conation.
Yeah, exactly. So basically what these break down as is cognition is the rational thought you have and interpret. Affect is the temporary feeling or emotions that you wear. And then conation is the intention to achieve valued goals. So keep those in mind as we move forward through this and how they all play a part within your brain. Other thoughts or questions on that? Beautiful. So, intrinsic motivation. Hit motivation, you already know. You know the song? Motivation? I'll put it in here. Okay, noted. But intrinsic motivation we already covered, right, in an earlier lesson. Who can go ahead and recap what we discussed?
It's a drive inside of yourself to get something done.
Boom, bingo, bamo, slammo, again. Exactly. So some examples of this that you may want to motivate yourself to do is reading a book, watching a movie, or hanging out with some friends. Because a lot of those things are less and less predictable the more you do them, right? Each movie is not going to be the same. Sometimes they are, and that's kind of annoying. But once you figure out, you typically don't rewatch that movie when you already know it's going to happen time and time again, unless you're infatuated with it. Same happens for a novel and some friends. So what is really interesting about intrinsic motivation, as the curiosity and interest decline, there's less motivation intrinsically. So if you have more curiosity and an interest in a specific item, you're going to be more motivated to do something about that. But once you lose curiosity and the interest, then you kind of just flatline on intrinsic motivation. An example I want to relate it to was school, especially high school. You hear time and time again, everyone's over it because you already know what you're going to be doing in one class and it's just the over and over again item. And it's because it's the lack of curiosity. Except for those that excel in learning, right? they are the individuals that are like, I love going to school because I want to keep learning. But some individuals flip side that and say, no, I already know everything. This doesn't make sense for me. I don't like it. So another instance of this, of intrinsic rewards, would be that learning component, or knowing or gaining more information than you had. How many of you feel like you go to class and learn something? No one? Some of you. Love that. Okay. So some motivation theories. Starting off with the drive theory. These are all your psychological needs. Breaks down very simply into food, sex, and sleep, right? Moving forward into arousal theory, which is all based on stimulation. What stimulates the brain and what doesn't. So when you have low stimulation, some of us are more tended to sleep or take a nap or whatnot or what have you. But when your stimulation's high and there's a lot of activity happening, you're very anxious. You want to move. You're very bouncy. And the only way that this is able to work really well in our benefit is when we have that sweet flow in the middle of not too much stimulation, but just enough where we're not tired and we're able to just soar with productivity. Have any of you had one of those moments where it's just like, yes, this is perfect. I'm not shaking from anxiety and I'm not tired? No one? Dead. That's fine. So Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Who's heard of this? Sweet, all of you. Okay, peachy. So it starts off psychological, moves up to safety, social and belonging, self-esteem, and then it ends with self-actualization. Who knows what that is?
Is that how you think about yourself?
Yeah, in a sense. And in relation to how you fit into the bigger puzzle, I would also add, and that is, okay, here's what I'm doing, here's my self-esteem, my belonging, and my safety. I can see all of that and how it plays into each other and how I can make it better, but how do I fit into the bigger puzzle of society or my community or my school, depending on the micro or macro level that you wanted to look at. But yeah, very good. Other questions with that? Okay, well, good job this week, y'all. Welcome everyone. This is chapter 7 for cognitive development through the lifespan. So throughout the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about cognitive development. Who can give me a simple term for cognitive development?
Your brain developing.
Bingo, bammo, I love it. So a lot of people compare this to nature and nurture. Who can tell me what nurture is?
It's how you're taking care of.
Exactly. And what's nature?
What's around you.
Peachy, exactly, what you're already surrounded with. So moving forward, behavioral genetics. This is how we act the way we act because of our parents, grandparents, or whatnot. So this is all influenced genetically. An example of this would be intelligence or your personality. A lot of the times that comes from a genetic code that was passed down from your parents or ancestors. So who you are today isn't because of you. It's because of your surroundings and the way you were nurtured and natured. So moving forward with innate knowledge is basically this genetic passing that we give to our offspring that says, hey, to survive, you need to know this. And that's Darwinism, right? Survival of the fittest and all of that fun jazz. So this innate knowledge of, okay, how am I going to survive? The only example I could think of was something I learned a long time ago in psychology from my undergrad, were babies gripping onto their moms as they fell. And a lot of this was back behind individuals or people having to run and then hold their babies, and they sometimes would trip and fall. So if the baby wouldn't hold on, they'd be left behind and lost. And so that's just something to think about, is something that is automatic for babies when they shouldn't know anything according to the nature part of it, or the nurture part, my bad. That's just very interesting. But moving forward to the nurture part, number one off the bat is socioeconomic status. Who knows what that is?
Where you're at on the.
It's like your income category, like your middle class or lower class.
Okay,
Yeah.
nice.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Okay, sweet, yeah. So with those, it's not only the money aspect, but it's also the school you're in, the neighborhood you're in. So socioeconomic status is how you fit into society as a monetary value, but also within the structures and classes that we have based off money primarily. So a lot of this impacts cognitive growth, and it's sometimes often overseen because of the studies and research back behind it. But some examples are really hard to disbelieve. So reading developments based on resources is very hard. So individuals that can't afford books growing up, they're not going to be at the same reading level as someone who grew up with a six-figure house income that was able to get a book every year for Christmas or whatnot, right? And that's just plain fact, Jane, how it be. And it's very interesting to see that that can severely impact someone's advantage in the world if you're not given a book growing up compared to someone else getting several. Beyond this, though, there's an intellect increase when you place toys, books, and technology in the parameters with an individual growing up. So like a little toddler, if you give them a phone, their brain is going to attach to the phone and how it works, and they're going to learn certain idioms off of that and mannerisms, right? And same with toys and books. And that's why we love giving learning tools with colors and stuff for toys, so they learn two things at once. And so that's just the basis for that. So are we a makeup of one of the other, both, or why? So do you think we're nature or nurture?
I think it's just a little bit of both.
A little bit of both?
Can't really have one without the other.
Yeah, I agree. Interesting, okay.
I would agree. I would say that a lot of it is nurture more than nature, but I think it depends on what your nature is. It can affect you in stronger ways depending on what it is that's around you. But
Yeah, I love that. Okay, and that's exactly what I believe too. I think that it is a relationship between both of them that lead to where we are today. So as we move forward with the cognitive development within our lifespan, there were certain terms deemed within the book that I thought were important to discuss. And it's often when we throw around the word expert. So expertise based on how we learn and how we become an expert in a subject, right? In adulthood, you should have about 10 years experience in a field to be considered an expert. So a lot of people say I'm expert at video games. So if you're playing since you were 6 and you're 16 now, you might be an expert at video games. Who knows, right? A lot of it is backed with research and a couple of other in-field placements though, so be wary of that. But Herbert Simon is an individual that has 50,000 pieces of information in long-term memory. So he is an individual that says all of us are able to keep up to 50,000 pieces of information, and that's just on average. So every time you learn something, you might be getting rid of something that had less importance to you or whatnot. So be cautious of that. You're average. Just kidding. So moving forward to chunking, and we covered chunking a little bit before, is just how you assimilate knowledge and pull it from your long term. Who remembers what the example was a couple weeks ago?
The area codes?
Yes, exactly, area codes. You're able to have them in your long-term memory and pull them out when you need them for a crutch or something to lean on. That's a great example of chunking. So moving forward is a term that I thought was important to share as well, which is genius. And this is thrown around a lot. They're like, oh, a kid genius, someone everyone should look up to, incredible, incredible, incredible. But basically, this is an individual that is a generator, someone that can contribute and not only continuously learn. So this is someone that adds new ideas or important and valued pieces of information that could benefit the work as a whole. So a genius is someone that says, okay, here's this, but think about this, and it may be something completely groundbreaking. That is what's considered a genius. And a lot of this is the commitment to excellence that each of us have some sense of within ourselves, but geniuses specifically, they have a belief in one's capacity to achieve it. So it's taking it the extra step and eliminating self-doubt and saying, I'm going to do it. I know I can. I'm going to. So I would challenge all of you when you leave here today to note that if you kind of get past that self-doubt and don't put up barriers for yourself, you could one day become a genius. Thanks. Hello, everyone. Welcome to my last lesson. Thank you for bearing with me through this assignment. I appreciate your participation and then your willingness as well. So moving into chapter 10, intelligence. I wanted to end with this one mainly because it was the last assignment, but also because it kind of encompasses everything we've been talking about and how to apply it. So moving forward into the intelligent quotient. How many of you have heard the term IQ? How many of you knew it stood for intelligence quotient? Beautiful, exactly. So who can tell me who Stanford Binet is? Or just Binet, because he was the individual that invented the IQ test. No? Okay. So Binet was this incredible individual that said there has to be some way to track intelligence, right? So he, and many of you participated in my short-term memory test, right? And so with that, there were several questions I pulled from his IQ test where it was pictures or letters, numbers, whatever it may be. So that was his way of ruling or measuring how smart you are. So for instance, or the kind of like the breakdown for the equation, I guess, is your mental age is the IQ, right? First, your chronological age, 22, times 100 is your IQ. So the mental age equals chronological age is 100. So if your mental age is the same as your age that you are, so let's say I'm 22 and my mental age is 22, my IQ is 100, which is pretty average. So that's okay if you are average. Not everyone can be a genius. Moving forward. Just kidding. Are there questions on IQ at all? Okay, sweet. So moving into two intelligences that I think were important to note during this chapter. The first one is called fluid intelligence. So this is problem solving effectively for trivial situations. Who can give an example of a trivial situation?
You come across a tree while you're driving and it's in the middle of the road. What do you do?
Bingo. Swerve, and you take care of the situation. Very trivial, right? It's like having a branch that you have to step over on a sidewalk. Something very simple. So around age 22 to 30, this is where we start to see a slow decline with your fluid intelligence. So your problem solving becomes harder as you get older, right? And some people, it's hard to wrap their head around that, but for our next intelligence, it will make sense for why. So moving forward, the fluid intelligence is mostly adaptable when we're young adults. So it's very elastic. We're able to kind of build what is our problem solving. So, and a lot of people recommend working when you're young to get that connection for problem solving in a workspace. So that way it's already built up and you're very strong and comfortable in that environment for when you enter the workforce. So moving forward to our second intelligence, which is crystallized intelligence. Who can read that first bullet point up there? Connor.
Acquire knowledge, often in verbal form.
Exactly. So this is where you have the attainment of all the knowledge, typically through words, right? So this is to be known to continuously increase over time. So you have two types of intelligence, one flatlines and declines, but this one continuously goes because these are items you continuously learn. So last week we touched base on 50 pieces of information that you're able to retain, and this very much plays into the same idea that you gain more knowledge as you go. And of course you can increase from 50,000 pieces of information, but typically right around there. So right when you're 60, if you're in good health, you'll start to see a levelized or more of a stabilizing manner of the crystallized intelligence becoming more flexible for you. So that's where you start backing off. You're like, okay, I'm pretty wise. And that's why a lot of people use the phrase, if you're older, you're wiser, because often it's true. You just have more life experience than others. So moving forward into emotional intelligence. Who has an idea for emotional intelligence, what that means? Hallie?
Understanding your own emotions.
Beautiful! I love that, exactly. So it's understanding your own emotions, how they work, how they operate, and how they play into other people's emotions. So this is the ability to kind of read your own and then play on others. A lot of people that are emotionally intelligent are social harmonizers. They can tell when someone's angry and they do tactics to calm the person down or understand them from where they're at versus looking down at them from where they are standing. If that makes sense. So who can think of a situation where you would need to be emotionally intelligent? Yeah, over there, Daniel.
Maybe you're in a social situation where someone's uncomfortable, but it's not like they're not being super verbal about it, but they clearly need to get out of that situation.
Okay, how would you handle it?
I would first of all verify that they are uncomfortable in that situation, and then we can take steps towards solving that problem.
Beautiful, exactly. So these are all ways that you manage emotional intelligence. And I know that through the Education College, they touch highly on this because as you're interacting with individuals in not only higher ed, but everywhere, you want to take into account other individuals' emotions. So that is everything. Thank you all for participating. Have a beautiful weekend.